Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à cette nouvelle session sur
Right. So welcome to this. I must say that 2 or 3 years ago, we would not have imagined this topic. That people such as L214 used to pass as activists, but today they are here at this round table. So now let me introduce the people who are going to participate. Laurence Parisot, who now works for a bank, is president of Citi, and she has been engaged for the animal cause. Jean-Baptiste Voisin, he's president LVMH artisan specialties. Brigitte Gauthier, we're happy to welcome her as not as an activist at the door and outside, but as the director of L214. And also Nicolas Treich, who is a state economist, a scholar at the Toulouse School of Economics. To start, have things evolved? How did you notice that things have evolved, and what was the triggering element? And tell us now, if today we continue to crush the male chicks, eggs, how things have evolved in mentalities and in fact. Hello all, thank you for the invitation. And it's a great roundtable. I'm very happy to be participating. And just to get the animal question in its context, we have never raised, killed, fished so many animals as of today. We are keeping on the upward movement. It has been stagnating a little bit in France, but it's going back up. We have never killed as many animals as today at a moment when we know that we don't need that. So I'm going to contradict the previous speaker. If meat was really indispensable, I would have died 30 years ago. No, it's not that necessary. Everything's fine. So animal maltreatment continues because 80% of animals are being slaughtered in slaughterhouses that come from intensive breeding farms. We kill 1 billion animals are being raised or farm. So there are some marginal improvements on the crushing of chicks. It is now prohibited to crush the male chicks. It was 50 million that were just crushed last year. With the ban, we are still with 8 million. They will not be crushed, but they can be gassed if they come from white chickens. We are in Toulouse, and let's talk about foie gras. The female ducks, baby ducks, are crushed also. So in periods of avian flu, duck liver, which used to be not so quality, considered as quality liver, suddenly becomes sort of magically better. The castration of piglets. So where we have managed to change things is we have managed to talk to companies. We have a campaign. We have campaigns directed toward industrialists for the caged hens, egg-producing hens. The number has fallen to 23%. We have gotten the commitments by several players. Avril, for instance, who used to have 1/4 of their egg production, which was so we have the European Chicken Commitment has managed to reduce the suffering of chickens by 80%. So things are moving forward. It is difficult to get the regulations to change, but in municipalities, for instance, and public orders, there are clauses that say we exclude products from intensive farms, or we put or we put more vegetarian meals, or we introduce vegan meals in collective catering. So the general picture, the landscape is not that funny, not that beautiful, but we have managed to raise in the public debate the question of the animal condition. Where do you put the cursor in regard to what you subject the animals to with this term of animal well-being? It's not animal well-being that's at stake, it's animal suffering. So thank you. Laurence Parisot, you have long been engaged in this notion of animal well-being. So your foundation, I have been told that there are the well-beingists and the the welfareists and the abolitionists. So you are a welfareist and Brigitte is an abolitionist. What is the difference? Can you tell us what the difference is? And do you think we should go all the way to abolition? Please explain the difference. Hello, thank you, and hello all. And I'm very, very happy to be here, and especially with the mix of speakers here to talk about this. It is a very remarkable to have this progress. To have Brigitte sitting next to Jean-Baptiste is, I think, something very symbolic of what's taking place. And it is very relevant and very useful, interesting to see that this question, when you look at it, if you think a little bit, if you make the effort of thinking whether you have a very strong sensitivity to this or not, we have to admit that we, men or women, we are absolutely cruel toward animals, absolutely cruel. And this is not a situation that has been around for 1 year or 2 years. It's been for millennia. And all types of animals are at stake, because we have talked a lot about farm animals, but we also talk about pets and wild animals. You really have to ask the question of, is it something we have to do? Can we do differently? Can we be not cruel? And this is why in many countries, and namely in France, there are associations, foundations, charities, which may have positions or priorities that are different. Because indeed, I think that between Brigitte Gauthier and me, there might not be such a big gap in terms of judgment or sensitivity, but we may have different priorities and different methods. So we may go back to this, but I think that the question from the standpoint of economics, it is an economic question, but it is also a very political question. You have to make public policy choices. Our foundation, the foundation that I'm the VP of, which is the Fondation Droit Animal, Animal Rights, Ethics and Science, which was founded at the end of the 70s, was created the same year as the year when Brigitte Bardot went on ice and jumped on a baby seal to prevent its being crushed and killed in a very atrocious way. So it's an old foundation, and Droit Animal, Éthique et Sciences is a foundation which is to promote all ideas, to promote animal condition, but always in such a way as to argue based on science, research, and legal framework. So it's a very rigorous approach, very prudent, but in fine, I think it has a very comparable aim as L214, This foundation now is presided over by Louis Schweitzer, and with Louis, myself as a VP, we act in such a way as to transform all good ideas into law. And we also favor or promote research in biology, ethology, social sciences, and legal studies. So it is an approach with major scientific rigor, because the questions that we have to face are questions of transition, the awareness, the conscientization. We have to reflect on transition, because the idea is not to really kill and scar the whole industrial landscape. We have to reflect on how to act differently. Now let me move over to you, because we're going to have a very concrete action that is conducted by LVMH, because you do make handbags, belts, and shoes with crocodile skin. That is not very popular, but this is something that you have fully incorporated the question of animal well-being in your production. How do you do that, and what is the reaction of the public to that action? Well, so here, economy is going to meet morals, because we started from the standpoint of our activity, which is to make handbags. And for different reasons, we wanted to incorporate things from upstream. So we bought the tanning. So we became skin managers, which was not necessarily our core business or core knowledge. And to realize that we needed to have nice leather, which means that we needed to have good animals, and we went the advantage of the crocodile. So each animal has its own story and its realities in terms of consumption and in terms of economic elements. But if you look at the crocodile, we're not crocodile experts, but we learned one thing, which is that before, this used to be a wild animal, and it's a dangerous animal. Crocodile is the fourth most dangerous animal on the planet. It kills and eats about 1,000 people a year. Sharks is 1 dozen a year. So in the ecosystem where the animal lives, it is considered an enemy. The living stock of that animal tended to get lower. Our forefathers became aware of this and created the CITES. This dates back to 1973, where they wanted the tracing, and they banned poaching and authorized crocodile farming. And so the farms started in the 70s. And for us, in the years 2000, we have this leather farm. So your farm is where the beasts, the crocodiles, do not fight each other. They have enough space to live and enough food. So we reflected on, we need to have good farms. We didn't find any. We are present in Florida, in Louisiana, where we are owners. We have some farms in Australia, in 2 states. And in Africa, things are a bit more complex, because it's a little bit more complex because of political stability in African countries. But in all those cases, we thought that we need to create a guide of the good practices, not just animal welfare, but what are the conditions to create a good skin. You know, a happy animal gives good meat and good leather. So if we were just cynical, we could achieve. It's not a sacrifice. The common good is not a sacrifice. It's an opportunity. you can achieve something that is economically viable, which is the case for us. And at least I think that for the animal, it's good. Our guide of good practice for farming has become the standard for animal welfare because we offered it to the community. We gave it to a scoring agency, and the rating agency has given it to all farms in the world. And this was based on our good practice guide.
Well, these are not totally happy, are they? Because they are still within the farm. You told me you were going to extend it to calves. So it's good that you should be asking your questions. I'm turning towards you because you convinced the Toulouse School of Economics to have a look at this, the animal welfare, because you warned us about it, and you were telling us that L214 made this awareness possible. Well, during our exchanges, I thought that L214 played an important role because they have their own means of communication. And that has a great, well, the videos were very significant and they played a great role about the slaughterhouses and intensive breeding. And a video is a communication tool which is absolutely amazing because you can see the reality as it is and you have the emotion on top. You get some credibility as a result because on the video you can see what goes on. This is the and there's the viral aspect as well through the technology of information. I don't think there were any scientific study of the impact of this video, but I'm sure that this has greatly contributed to have a change, to make some visible changes, because we saw the problems, we saw the reactions on the part of the populations who felt concerned when looking at the practices and in some breeding houses or farms. So in that particular sense, yes, it contributes to a certain awareness raising in the population, and I agree with what has been said as well. I think that in terms of the legal transcription, advances are quite modest. Now, how can animal welfare be part of the common good then? Answer, well, this is a very stupid question, but I think it had to be formulated. Well, the animal welfare can be seen as a common public good. If you improve the way people are bred, animals are bred, all the persons concerned with the animal welfare will also benefit on top of the animal. And this is the definition. And it's a public affair as well, because it's up to the state, to the government, to implement or set up the rules and regulations adapted to that. You wanted to say something on that? Well, yes, I think this is a very important point. First of all, I do share your advice about the essential role of the videos from L214. We have to really support what you've done on this particular case, and it has been a major tipping point, particularly in France. But I think there's another dimension which is also looking at that of the common good, which is accounting for this particular opinion of on the part of the public in terms of animal welfare. We are very much aware of the Damocles sword, which is on top of our planet. And this plays a major role as well. And so far, we used to say that the life in common was between men, and the political debate is how you're going to manage the various populations. But then today, if we look at the whole planet, it's also a life in common which concerns humans as well as animals. And we are all together living on this planet, and our future and what will be in the future will be common. And I think this is also a sign that the welfare of the animal or animals in all their diversity, because there's such an incredible variety, it's part of the common good. Another question, which means that we're going to tackle the second part, which is the substitution part, products. Where does it stop? The defending animal welfare, should it mean that we are going to consume less meat? On behalf of this welfare, are we going still to continue consuming? And this is at the border between the welfarists and those who do not want to have the animals as slaves or objects. Who wants to respond first to this particular question? Well, be brief, because there will be plenty of questions on that particular topic. So if you could be brief. Yes, looking honestly at animal welfare. I was talking about limiting the suffering of these animals. When we published all the slaughterhouse videos, we realized when we talk about this, we have a paradox with the meat, because on the one hand, it's a consumption product, it's a habit. It so happens that that it's very good to consume meat or cod oil, but then for the cost for the animals is extremely high, even if it pleases the consumer. So animal welfare again, and the consideration for animals would be such that we no longer consume any meat. And if you are to consume plants, is better. So if you are 100% plant eaters, it's much better. But we are pragmatic. We are in a society which has got cultural habits. Between two rectangle triangles, Pythagoras was already wondering about consuming animals, or should we not consume them? There was no intensive breeding at the moment at that time, and they were not killing 1 billion animals a year. So that's a very important question. If you look at the 2030 agenda, we look at the climates and the sustainable development and the planetary limits, and we should have some objectives in our mind, and that would bring a consensus among all scientists. We should reduce by 50% the consumption of animal-derived products by 2030. We should have a common objective which would bring a consensus when we ask at the presidential election whether people would support a decrease by 50% of the meat consumption. They said yes. So there we are very much ready. But then the food environment is such that if you look at the buffet we had today, what sort of it was not 100% plant-based. So there we had some mustard and bread. That's fine, but then that is not sufficient in itself. So again, I'd like to talk about the substitution products, because we talked about the vegetable steaks. Now, we think that science is going to solve a number of issues, but it's not necessarily that easy. And I'm looking at Jean-Baptiste, who was telling me about these the fake leathers, which is not necessarily a progress, because it's plastic and these are objects that are less sustainable than leather. Could you explain that to us? Because it's counterintuitive. But then you are saying as well, let us not be rushing towards diesel, for example, or new products. Well, do not do the reverse either, because and so what we are trying to do, we are trying to work on both topics. We're working on leather because it's really the foundation of our activity, because we are leather factory workers, and we want to improve as well the sustainability of all our activities. And so we conduct research and development activities at a fairly high level in parallel as well. Over the last 3 years, we have a very small team which is doing a world screening of all the startups working on the alternative materials, be they for leather, for silk, and for furs, based on animals. So, why did we do that at the level of the strategy level in our company? Why did we decide to set up such a little team? What goes on? Well, these startups that are at the very early stage in their history, and we have a proof of concept, and the first product was okay, and they're looking at the brands. And there you have the Jacques Vabre effect. They come, the labels or the brands, so it's not up to the level. And as there are startups, they do not have the skills or the means enabling them to really finish their products. So what we have decided to do was to set up a screening team to get an idea and integrating this into a lab which will be open before the end of the year to really get these startups moving to complete their work. DuPont was a substitute in the States and in Europe. They had plenty of problems to get some wild silk. So silk is still existing. So we do not want to avoid super opportunities. And I know I'm a bit long in my presentation, but what do we observe today? There are many promises that are made, but then if the ecological or environmental stock is not very good, or assessment is not very good, because 90% almost of all the products that are offered as all possible alternatives to leather or silk are in fact based on petroleum. Right? And we have a doctrine that internally we want to get rid of plastic as much as we can in all our products and in all our processes. We are not going to start replacing things where there's no plastic by something which has got plastic. Something which lasts for 60 years instead will only be lost. Well, I noted that you wanted to talk about this subject, but I think you also wanted to talk about the innovations. In the wake of what has just been said in the economy, there's a lot of research and innovation. This is the very center of growth. And in terms of animal welfare, the innovation is very important. And in the 19th century, we replace the whales' ribs by fossil energy, and then we replace the carts driven by oxen. But there's an industry which has not evolved since the 1870. And that industry, I hope, will be improved with that of leather, because we are tanning leather still today with the same process. There were some small changes, but it hasn't changed mainly in terms of tanning. So, yes, but then very often we can see it's very difficult to change the demand and also the consuming habits and also the economic balances. So innovation is going to create some strength. And I think that this is what has happened very much in the past, not always, but very much often. We can see that today with the research or the work done on alternatives to furs. Or the use of hemp, for example, or the grown meat. There's a technique which exists at the moment enabling us to produce meat in the lab. This has been authorized in one country. Well, it shows that there are reticences as well, because this so-called grown meat is already prohibited in schools. Yes, well, we are very much unique in France in this field, because the so-called grown meat, we are the first country in the West to have promulgated a prohibition of this innovation, which is not still allowed. Or even in Europe, it's already prohibited in public canteens. So you can see there's a zealous administration about that. And I know that we are going in the wrong direction, because we have to leave the talents, develop their talents, and we want to encourage, incentivize innovations, providing there's no danger. And this is the future which will tell us. British wanted to say something about the substitution or replacement products. Could we hope a lot? Can we hope a lot about these replacement products? Maybe we can answer the question, will we be able to get rid of breeding? Well, yes, I think that we are tackling not enough the need of what is, and looking at the external negative externalities of the impact. Now, the maltreatment of, well, you can do whatever you want. It's not expensive, and there won't be any consequences. And the slaughterhouse, where we have shown that there was a lot of infringements to the law. And when I'm saying that, it means additional suffering to the animals, or the legal consequences were not, or almost nothing. And talking about the polluting, tanning, I think it is extremely polluting as well. And the question is, do we need to have crocodile-made handbags? We could ask these questions rather than develop breeding farms. I know that we are killing these animals in the end, whatever happens, and so we have this question, and I think this is true for the luxury items, because there we are considering handbags of a certain price. But well, yes, but there are other materials than plastic if you want to use plastic as a substitute. But we could look at this differently as well. So and regarding the food, we need to be fed, all right. We need a number of nutriments, but still, should we go through producing animal products? And this is the question we should ask ourselves. And is it necessary in the end? At the end of the day, to get rid of this? Well, yes, summed up in 3 sentences for a whole societal project. The answer is, in short, is yes, we can do that. We're talking about landscapes. If there aren't any animals, there won't be any mountains, fields. But remember that maintaining these animals, it's done. Maintaining these mountains is done with living animals. While the economy, we know that with that economically, the breeding activities, they need a lot of subsidies, and still people only survive. Those who are the breeders, I'm not even talking about the working conditions for the slaughterhouse workers. There's a system here with a lot of external negative externalities. In terms of the environment is bad, in terms of health is bad as well. Now, well, for L214, this is an objective with thresholds, as I told you earlier on. Now, you wanted to, do we still need crocodile handbags? I can't answer this question because it's a matter of taste and trends. But then if we do it, we have to do it well. And I think that what is interesting, just like you brought some light, which is quite crude, on a number of practices, and because we're not naturally farmers, this is not a vocation, we became such. But if you look at how our farms are operating, particularly in Africa, because that's where we get most of them, then, as I was explaining, the animal welfare is important because we have to do things well. And we looked at what's around it. And very naturally, again, we moved from breeding to an ecosystem. And then in one of our farms in Africa, we started with one, then there's a second one in progress, and we have 8 farms in Africa, and we have 6 in later on, and we are developing a whole virtuous ecosystem. We've got water, because for the crocodile to be well bred, you have to change the bath water twice a week, because that's the way you have to do things. And then afterwards, you can do some reasoned agriculture. You can do some planting as well to bring some shade to these animals. It's about 100 employees in a farm outside in the rural area. The village will depend, and there's about 500 to 1,000 people living in this village, and the additional revenue will enable these workers. We have a foundation, we have created a school and a medical center and a crafts center, and these will bring about 20 permanent staff members at the moment, and each year they will see 300 or 400 people visit. And so there we're starting with a farm. Now the animals are well bred, well cared for, that this generates an additional value. It's a very beautiful leather skin. It's expensive, but then there's a return to the farmer, which is shared with the local communities, and this whole ecosystem is being developed in very good conditions, better than we used to be in that particular region. While you talk about the replacement products, what about the objectives of getting rid of breeding these animals? Well, I cannot answer this particular question, honestly, because I only know that, come back to what I've said before, Now, the first of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, do we behave cruelly or not? Now, if with this only question, we were to wonder whether we can improve the situation or not, then there's a whole field of investments, transformation, and changes, which is huge, which has to be implemented. So now, if we breed an animal to kill it, isn't that cruel? Well, yes, it is, but it all depends on the way we kill it. Yes and no. And so, do you know that do you know how we kill the pigs in our country? Do you know how we kill the pigs? Now, well, anesthesia, no. Okay, we plunge them into gas, okay, with a very high level of CO2 in the gas. And I'm sure you must have some images in your mind. It's about 30 or 50 seconds of total, absolute horror and fright. And what you have to understand when you reflect upon this animal welfare, now these animals, even this pig, is quite sensitive and is an intelligent animal and is understanding what goes on to him. And Mrs. Gigotier talked about Pythagoras. Now, but you have to know that there are so many philosophers who, ever since the antiquity or at the start of our era, Plutarch, for example, was saying that on behalf of what should we subtract light and the sun? How is it that we cannot understand that when they shriek? These are prayers for us to stop. Now, if in our own processes, industrial processes for breeding, we were to integrate this dimension, then there would be a very fruitful innovation. And I was responding to the word innovation because this is in this field that we need to have some innovation. For example, there are startups that are trying to make sure that we can identify the sex of the gender of the chicken before it gets born, because crushing these chickens between males and females, I don't know whether you've seen this. These are, we have seen the videos, it's absolutely horrifying. So we should really stop behaving as monsters. And I'd like to say something else about innovation, because I think that you can have some economic innovation, and we do need economists to think about the other ways in which we could produce, and we should think about new business models, and we should think about financial innovation as well. If I may, I'd like to give you an example, because this is the very start of this financial innovation, and I think it's very interesting, because a few weeks ago in Ecuador, the state, they were on the brink of default. In other words, the Ecuadorian state was no longer able to reimburse its debt of $1.6 billion. Now, there were discussions going on with various international institutions and also private investors. And rather than having a restructuring of the debt, which is a conventional way of doing things, said, OK, we're going to repurchase 60% of your debt. Now, Ecuador will only have 60%, about the $1.6 billion to be reimbursed at an horizon which was very far in time. So as an exchange, because this is supported by various international organizations, the state will have what has not been paid, the balance, you will have to dedicate it exclusively to protecting the Galapagos Islands underwater area, to protect these species and all the biodiversity in that sea. And I could also tell 2 or 3 other stories, like an operation I participated in, That would be a conclusion because time is of the essence. However, it's very important to talk about what is innovating economic and financials, and also regarding the animal welfare, because we never talk about that. And about a year ago, I participated in the broadcast to the production of a debt in order to protect the rhinos in Southern America. That's profitable for the park, which is doing that, and also for the financial investors. So there you have to look at things in a very positive manner. If we are aware of the problem, of course, we're going to find ways and means. There are levers, okay, to try and solve these issues. So that brings us to the conclusion. How so far can we go? And what are the priorities? Because we can see that there are those who want to maintain the system, but we should be more human with animals, and those who are saying that the end goal is to respect totally the animals. So I would like to ask you the question to you. So far, how far can we go? Can we do without breeding? And I know that you told us that you were killing crocodiles in a very proper manner. They're not suffering, okay, fine, but it's possible, but still you have to kill them in the end. So, so economically and morally, how do you do that? We do the same job as Veolia, because we are to collect the waste from the meat industry or the skin. This is a waste for the meat industry, and make it clean. We've been doing this for so many years, but it's just now what we do. We produce super handbags as a result. Now, as long as there's a meat industry, will exist, because there's an industry of the crocodile meat. It seems paradoxical to certain, but not in Africa, because there's people are animists and they do not like it all that much. But if you go to Florida, for example, you will find it, and very clearly in Asia, I saw in Carrefour supermarket in Guangzhou, in Canton, I saw on the fish market there were some crocodiles that were cut in three. So yes, there's plenty of
industry.
So, when dealing with food industry, we do exist, and we are not doing any harm to the planet, because if the skin is not retrieved, it will have to be destroyed, it will have to be burned, and it's not very good for the world. How far should we go, Brigitte? Well, in 1 minute. 55 seconds rather, doesn't give me much time to react to what has been said so far on animal welfare. But actually, if we take animals into account, that is to say, if we consider them as living beings, we will have to change gear. Let's be practical. What is urgent today is to put an end to intensive breeding, to the worst animal practices, pigs, chickens, hens, chickens with selected genetic breeding, thus entailing animal suffering, not to mention fish. We have emptied the oceans from fish. This also means reducing our consumption by 50% by 2030 to apply by sustainable goals, sustainable development goals. And when they consider you have to reduce or to diminish the number of cattle heads, I'm not talking here about the Federation of Farmers, and read the book entitled Silence in the Fields. That I recommend this book to all of you. Well, what I mean is we do need a real cooperation in the public policies and in the policies together with the farmers unions, etc. We act on health, social dimensions, and the health dimension too. Quite quickly, what about priorities now? Well, there are two different avenues which haven't been sufficiently explored so far. And here I turn to Mrs. Parisot. I mean, finance must finance must take the financial world must take into account the animal welfare, and let's not forget, last but not least, governance. If you want animal welfare to be improved, things are quite difficult. Producers are really reluctant. So we do need that institutional level, entities, institutions which take this animal welfare on board. We would need a secretary, perhaps a ministry or secretariat of state dedicated to animal welfare. And your association is working on this and in this direction. Quite briefly, Laurence, would you say that current policies are not at all up to these pending challenges? A lot remains to be done, actually. And to go back to what Nicolas has just said, in the last few years, we have been asking for the creation of a Secretariat of State and dedicated Secretary of State dealing with animal welfare and to tackle all these issues. Another example I'd like to share with you: during the latest presidential elections, we had a woman, a lady running for the elections and representing animal welfare. Let's not forget that 2/3 of the French people are in favor of progress in the field of animal welfare. And for all that, this lady wanted to run for the presidential election, didn't get the necessary number of signatures to be granted by the elected people. The elected people were kind of reluctant, shy, let's say, and it's a pity, actually. And I would say that the elected people, let's be kind, are highly conservative. Thanks very much to all of you.